Hi everyone, how's it going? Hope you guys are doing well today. Hope everything is great and that you've been staying hydrated and drinking lots of water and have eaten something at some point today. I'm doing well. My rib is fixed, boys. Woo! I'm also very tired, but you know what? It's gonna be a good day. We're gonna have a good stream. So, a couple things. First of all, there are like a crap ton of people in my suite right now for some reason. I'm really annoyed with it. I'm not going to explain the situation right now, but it's dumb and I'm really annoyed. So, if you hear voices in the background, try to ignore them. Speaking of eating is 4. You should eat something. Grab a snack or something and chill out with me. I think that's kind of it. A reminder that I'm not streaming tomorrow because I have an overnight conference, but I will be streaming again on Sunday. And today we're starting Stolen Tongues, which is something that you guys in the chat told me you'd be interested in me doing, is reading a horror book for a while because I love this book. So we're just going to read as much as we can, and how this is going to work is it's going to be... Okay, Nightbot, why are you freaking out? What just happened? Hang on. I'm so sorry. Nightbot is being a freak right now. Let me try and fix him. Let me fix you, first of all, Mr. Fox. I'm so sorry that Nightbot is being an actual freak. Wow, I would love it if I could fix you. How long is 600 seconds? Holy crap, Nightbot, what is your issue? Alright, Nightbot, we're gonna fix you. I don't know why you're moderating so hard. Okay. Spam protection. Here we go. We're gonna disable the emotes, disable the caps, so you should be okay now. Everything should be good now, so... I am struggling to let you not be timed out anymore, Mr. Fox, but just know that you are free to do as many emotes and caps as you want once you are allowed to chat again, so I'm very sorry about that. I don't know why Nightbot was gatekeeping so hard, but that's okay. Anyway, I was saying that the way this is gonna work is it's gonna be similar to my Reddit stories, to where I'm gonna read a page and then in between each page I'll stop and read chat. So that being said, we're going to switch over to our spooky music and our spooky scene and jump right in. This is called Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, I believe. Yes, Blackwell. Okay, prologue. Deep in the Rocky Mountains, at the top of a howling peak, sits a cabin. It is a lonely and unremarkable thing, nestled at the end of a winding gravel road and surrounded by a crescent of woods. There are no other houses nearby, and if not for the distant town it overlooks, a visitor to this cabin might get the impression that she was entirely cut off from the world. It is at this site that my life descended into a surreal nightmare. What happened on that mountain left permanent scars on my body and heart, but also threw light onto seemingly unrelated events that occurred long before. And so, the story begins years prior to the incident at that wretched place. I've known my best friend Colin since we were little. On his 9th birthday, his mom bought him a bird for a pet, an African gray parrot. They're quite smart and good with kids, so the bird ended up being wildly amusing to the both of us. Naturally, we tried to teach her swear words. But her first word ended up being carrot, so we named her Carrot the Parrot. I never realized it until I was much older, but Carrot did a whole lot more than just learn words and repeat them. She recognized people and greeted them uniquely. She learned to speak politely to Colin's mom, but addressed Colin's little brother via "Hello, twerp." Sometimes she'd even try to comfort people when she heard them arguing or crying, usually by saying things like "Don't cry" or "I love you." The bird knew people by their faces and voices, so she would sometimes get upset when she saw an unfamiliar person. When we were 12 years old, Colin and I put on Halloween masks and spoke to Carrot. It was amazing watching her try to reconcile our familiar voices with the strange new faces. You could actually see her in her expression how puzzled she was. In response to some Halloween masks, she'd even shriek "ugly, ugly" and flap her little wings. I came to know Colin because we'd lived on the same street. Whenever I'd head up the walkway to his front door, Carrot would shout "knock knock" before I arrived, obviating the need to ring the bell. At times, she'd play games with us. If I walked away from her cage, she would say "colder, colder," and as I walked toward it, she would say "warmer, warmer." And at the time, I never appreciated how sharp she was, but in retrospect, Carrot was cognizant of everything going on around her, and that is what made her so frightening. When I was a senior in college, I started dating a woman named Faye. Colin had recently gotten married and asked us to look after his pets while he and his wife Gabriella went on a honeymoon. At the time, they lived up in the mountains in a rather impressive old house, left to Gabriella after the untimely death of her father. It was only a 45-minute drive from our campus, so Faye and I happily obliged. I was thrilled to see the parrot again and to get away from school for a few days with my new girlfriend. I could hear Carrot's trademark "knock knock" as we fumbled with the old door, and she lit up when we walked in. Although she hadn't seen me in a few years, the bird still recognized me and was even curious about Faye. There were also 2 excitable huskies named Boomer and Chewy, so we had plenty of animals to keep us entertained. I'm going to interject by saying the main characters are essentially my age. I'm a senior in college, so they're around 20, 21, maybe even 22, somewhere in there, just to put it into perspective. The bird's cage sat in the breakfast nook, which overlooked the little grove of trees outside. There was a glass door that slid open in that room, leading out to a deck. Whenever Faye and I left it open for fresh air, Carrot would shout "up yours" and "damn liberals" at the hummingbirds that flitted by. Colin had taught her all kinds of silly phrases to embarrass Gabriella when they had company over. Faye and I spent the first evening on the couch watching movies and laughing at Carrot's ridiculous prattle. Later that night, I found myself alone at the table, working on a paper. Faye was asleep on the couch. I could only see her strawberry curls dangling just above the snoring dogs on the floor. The TV was off. Carrot had relaxed and was watching me quietly from her cage, and in that moment, I realized how dreadfully silent it was. Not just the animals, not just the house, but the entire forest outside had fallen utterly still. The quiet lulled me out of focus and crushed my will to be productive, so I woke up Faye and the dogs, and we headed upstairs to the guest bedroom. There's a brief moment at night when the brain is neither awake nor asleep, but somewhere in between. In that moment, I sometimes hear things, distant voices or odd sounds. Normally, I dismiss them as wisps of dreams, but just barely taking form at the edge of consciousness. So when I heard a noise on this particular night, I ignored it as long as I could, but the sound kept invading my mind over and over. Eventually, I sat up in bed, trying to determine whether the noise was real. After a moment, I heard Carrot chattering downstairs. As I recalled from my childhood, she almost never speaks when she's by herself, and virtually never makes any noises at night. But now she was mimicking laughter and saying, "Hello, hello." I assumed the bird was trying to get my attention, so I went down to check on her food bowl. When I flipped on the light, Carrot was staring up at the ceiling, captivated by something I couldn't see. I figured that she'd spotted one of the many moths we let in earlier while taking the dogs out. The bird refused to speak to me at all. I shrugged and went back to bed. She grumbled a few more times that night as I fell asleep, but I couldn't make anything out. The next morning, it was brilliantly sunny outside, so Faye and I took the dogs for a hike in the woods. We explored for a bit and returned home around lunchtime. As we approached the sliding glass door in the back, I could hear Carrot yelling knock knock and hello from inside. She flapped her little wings in salutation as we entered and whistled excitedly. The day carried on with more of her nonsensical jabbering, but as twilight descended, the bird's behavior changed. She appeared fixated on the sliding glass door and on a window in the kitchen, occasionally cocking her head to study them intently. Faye was the one to notice this time, but she dismissed it as Carrot hearing owls or catching glimpses of bats near the porch. That night, as we lay in bed, Boomer and Chewy seemed agitated. They kept getting up from their doggy beds and looking around, sniffing in the direction of the hall and jolting awake shortly after settling down. The jingling of their collars began to drive me insane, so I led the dogs into the master bedroom with the intent of locking them in. As I did, Carrot called from downstairs, knock knock, knock knock. Feeling a little creeped out, I went down and checked on her. She was there again. She was again engrossed with the glass door. There was nothing to see out there. It was just a wall of soupy darkness. Even when I flicked on the porch light, only an empty deck and the faint outlines of nearby trees could be seen. I closed the blinds, hoping they'd pacify Carrot, and trudged back upstairs. The moment I hit the second floor, the bird shrieked, knock knock. This time, her call positively unnerved me. I jogged down the flight and stormed to the front door, glaring out the peephole with a wild expectation that a madman would be standing there clutching a knife. Alas, there was no one, just an empty footpath that led down to the dark street. As I pulled my face away from the door, Carrot made growling noises, then laughter. Finally, I am back. I said Nightbot was bullying me. I guess you took that personally. That's so funny. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I wasn't aware that Nightbot would be so much of a gatekeeper, but I fixed him, so he should not be timing out people for putting a ton of emotes or caps, so it should be good. I put in Nightbot because I wanted to do some commands, so I have a Discord command now, which is nice. My heart fluttered in my chest. Was this a trick that Colin had taught his bird to play on me? I circled the first floor, turning on every light and investigating every room, but found nothing out of the ordinary. I sighed with defeat and sleepiness, told Carrot to shut the hell up, and went back to bed. While closing the bedroom door, I heard her call out softly, "Don't cry, don't cry." Faye laughed at me when I told her of the previous night's events. She spent that Saturday playfully mocking my credulity and baby-talking the parrot. "Did you play a trick on Felix?" she'd ask while scratching the bird's cheeks. Carrot reveled in the attention and mumbled her pleasure. "Yes, you did. You scared him good. What did you see? You see those bats in the porch?" We barbecued on the patio and took the dogs for an afternoon romp through the forest, this time much further out, and barely found our way back in the dying light. Strange noises emanated all around us from the deep woods, prompting eruptions of frenzied barking from the dogs every few minutes. By the time we got back to the porch, the gloom had deepened to a nearly black, making the glowing lights of the house look warm and inviting. Carrot, however, was not as welcoming. She cowered at the bottom of her cage, beneath her perch, and behind a swinging rope. She looked up at me, apparently relieved, and cautiously edged out of her hiding place. Faye opened the cage and coaxed the parrot to step onto her hand. "What's wrong, pretty bird?" she asked in a motherly voice. "You hear a scary noise?" Faye stroked Carrot's head, trying to calm her, but the bird kept glancing over to the sliding glass door. "She's shaking," Faye said, turning to me. "Scared to death." I checked to ensure the door was locked, squinted into the darkness beyond it, and then drew the blinds and joined Faye in her attempt to soothe the bird. Eventually, Carrot relaxed enough to be returned to her cage without a fuss, but the bird's disposition only added to our growing unease. There was definitely something strange up here on the mountain. That night, as Faye and I were lying on the bed watching a movie on my laptop, there came a commotion from downstairs. It sounded like utensils being spilled in the kitchen, but I realized after a moment that it was Carrot's cage. The bird shrieked and the dog started barking. I leapt out of bed and flew down the stairs to find Boomer and Chewy snarling at the patio door. This is a good book. We haven't even gotten into it. This is only the prologue. I will say this. If any animal is ever acting strangely at nothing, get the heck out. I don't even care what you believe. Just leave. Just yeet. This music doesn't help. Well, I think it helps. I think it helps a lot. The bird's cage lay on the ground, Carrot flapping around inside it. I raced over and set the cage upright, then yanked the blinds open. The porch was empty, and a breeze set by the nearby woods fluttering. I pulled at the door to ensure it was still locked. Satisfied that no one had come through it, I searched the house again, and once again found nothing out of the ordinary. When I passed a large portrait of Gabriella's late father, thoughts of his ghost shuffling through the halls drifted into my mind. I wondered if he was still here, then shook the idea from my head. Faye called out from the top of the stairs, asking what had happened. The dogs heard something outside and started freaking out, I said. I think Carrot got upset and knocked her own cage off the table. The explanation didn't satisfy either of us, but it was the only one I was willing to consider. Bring her upstairs, Faye replied. We can put her up here tonight. See if that calms her down. I laughed. Are you kidding? She'll keep us up all night. My protest fell on deaf ears. Faye had already descended the stairs and walked up behind me. We'll keep her up all night, she said, stabbing a finger into my ribs. Prologue is good. Yes, it is. The music is great for this book. The music is great for any story. It is my go-to scary music. I immediately abandoned my resistance and nodded in agreement. Dogs too, she said, grabbing the cage and whistling at Chewy and Boomer. They trotted up the stairs behind her, overjoyed to be allowed back into our bedroom. They, like Carrot, did not like to sleep alone, especially not downstairs for some reason. I shrugged helplessly and followed everyone back to the guest room, closing the door and locking us inside. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I woke up to the bird chattering in the dark. Don't cry, don't cry, she repeated from across the room. I reached over a sleeping Faye and grabbed my cell phone off the nightstand, using it to illuminate the room in a faint glow. Carrot was sitting on her perch, facing the bedroom door. She craned her head to the side, listening intently for something I couldn't hear, and opened her mouth as if considering what to say. Chewy dug her snout under the door and sniffed around while Boomer sat rigid, ears perked, head jerking back and forth as he tried to hone in on whatever Carrot sensed. Faye mumbled something in her sleep, but I could barely make it out. It sounded like, where'd they find? It's where he is. Boomer whimpered, and Chewy withdrew from the door. She retreated to Boomer's side and sat down next to him. The bird called out, colder, colder, reciting the words to the game we used to play as kids. I shook Faye awake and motioned to the scene before us and pressed my finger to my lips. She remained quiet, but her eyes screamed in terror. Even in the dark, I could see their whites. She huddled there under the blanket as I got out of my bed and slipped my jeans on. Carrot flapped her wings and called out, warmer, warmer. The dogs stood up defensively, but did not bark or growl. They only listened, and occasionally glanced at each other and back at me. Warmer, warmer, the bird cried, beating her wings faster. After a few seconds, she ceased her movements and looked at me, then back at the door, and said in a softer voice, knock, knock. I stood rooted to the floor, breath caught in my throat. The door rattled gently in its frame, as if someone had pressed an ear against it. The silence was only broken when Faye whispered, don't open it. Her words didn't register in my brain. I reached out and pulled the door open slowly. It issued a loud creak that echoed through the house. There was no one there. I felt the dogs brush past my legs as I stood in the doorway. They stood before me motionless, gazing down the darkness of the hallway. At the far end, the master bedroom door was open. Run, run, run. Get the heck away from there. What are you guys, stupid? Run. Literally. Great, now I'm paranoid. This book made me paranoid. Just like, wait. Inside it was pitch black, but the dogs peered in as though they could see something. What is it? I whispered, patting Chewy's head. She didn't move a muscle. Her entire body was rigid, ready to attack, but neither dog made a sound. I waited through the dark of the hall to peek inside Colin's room, but I was stopped by a powerful wave of nausea. The wall spun around me and my legs went rubbery. I caught myself on the handrail next to the stairs. As I regained my sense of balance, Carrot said from behind me, "Warmer," and then shrieked, "Ugly, ugly." Her cage rattled again and Faye screamed. I bolted back down the hall, nearly tripping over the dogs who were now barking and snarling wildly. I flicked the light on in the guest room to see Faye, sitting at the far end of the bed, knees pulled up to her chest, terror in her expression. Carrot's cage was on the floor again, and the bird was flapping around inside, still shrieking. Someone was in here, Faye choked out, trying to hold back tears. It felt like there was someone standing right there. She pointed directly at me. At this point, I'd seen enough. We got dressed, threw our luggage together, and ushered the dogs out the front door. We all piled into a car and sped down the mountain. A full moon lit our path. All the way home, Faye and I traded stories of all the creepy and unexplainable things that had happened to us in our lives. Most of mine involved the sounds I hear at night, and most of hers involved sleepwalking as a child. Carrot watched our conversation from her cage on Faye's lap, but never uttered a word the entire drive. When Monday rolled around, Colin and Gabriella were surprised to hear that they had to come pick up their pets from my apartment. In the coming years, I learned from them that Carrot never spoke again. That was the end of the prologue. Smart decision. You guys finally have a good idea. I will say, for most of this book, I do very much think it's realistic of like what I would do in a situation. I think Felix, the main character, is a little hard-headed sometimes because he's very superstitious. Is it not superstitious? What is it? Is it superstitious? I think that is the right word. Anyway, he has a hard time like believing that type of stuff, so he wants to have a rational explanation for a lot of it, but I think that's very realistic in their actions. What are you trying to use the word as? He like has a hard time believing in like the paranormal. I believe it. No, superstitious is believing the paranormal. What is the word I'm looking for? It is the opposite. Oh no, what's the word I'm looking for? It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh no, I might just move on because I feel like it's not going to come to me. I don't know. It's I can't think of it right now. But it's like the type of person who wants to believe in that stuff but has a really hard time like believing in it, you know? Unbelieving. That's what it means. But that's not the word. Anyway, I'm moving on. This is in parts rather than chapters. So this is part 1. So this is why I also wanted to read it on stream, because I don't technically have to stop in the middle of chapters. It's in like big parts. So this is part 1. I hadn't seen the snow in decades. Fresh powder dusted the road, and our rental car struggled to make it up the hill. It was hard to take in the beautiful view while trying not to plummet off the cliff, but I managed. To the right, an icy pine forest drifted past, and to the left, far below, lay an enormous valley. A big town rested inside it. All around us, dozens of other snow-capped mountains jagged the rim of the horizon. My goodness. Faye was my co-pilot. She pushed a stream of fiery gold hair out of her face and studied the map on her phone. 1/2 mile to go, she said, glowing with excitement. It was Thursday afternoon, and we were on our way to her family's cabin, high up on the Pale Peak. The mountains was about a 2-hour drive from her parents' house in Avonwood, Colorado. We'd set out that morning after her mother surprised us with the key. Faye and I had just gotten engaged a few weeks earlier, and her parents had flown us out to celebrate. So what are you looking for? No, definitely not religious. Let me... I'm looking it up. Maybe I can look it up, I don't know. Bruh, I don't even know. Skeptic! Skeptic, yes, I found it. It's a skeptic. It was an S word, that's what's happening. Um... Okay. Hang on. Lol. That was awkward. Okay, well they're banned now, so that's cool. Anyway, the stream is off to a great start. I'm so happy. This month marked our 5th anniversary as a couple. I was a graduate student working on a PhD in English, and Faye had recently begun her career as an animal keeper at a wildlife sanctuary. We had always talked about taking a trip, but life never stopped flinging new hurdles at us, and somehow that talk of escape never came to fruition. The time we spent together faded to brief moments before bed. It took an engagement ring and a war with our bosses to pull it off, but at long last we were finally on vacation. A romantic cabin getaway, totally unexpected, and far removed from the humdrum of California living. On the plane, I'd imagined a week with Faye's waspy parents in their immaculate house, but I was delighted when they lent us their cabin for a few days. I pictured myself and Faye wrapped in blankets by a crackling fire, sipping hot chocolate and whimsically debating the terms of our marriage. She'd demand regular back rubs, and in return I'd be allowed to buy video games whenever I wanted. Oh my gosh, Faye said, interrupting my train of thought and swatting my thigh. Felix, look! As we rounded another corner of the winding road, a little house came into view. It wasn't much more than a cottage tucked in an idyllic tree line. The whole scene might have climbed straight out of a Kincaid painting. Dang, I muttered. The car practically died in the driveway. Faye jumped out and raced in a circle around my cabin, taking it all in. "Oh my gosh, it's adorable," she yelled from behind the building. I could hear her laughter as I unloaded the car. "And look back here, Felix, a hiking trail right out the back door." I followed the tracks she left in the snow. There was barely a half-inch of it, just enough to tint the earth white. But a boyish giddiness brimmed inside me at the sound of each crunching footfall. As I rounded the back of the cabin, a brown and white snowball pelted me in the neck. "Faye!" I shouted. "That had rocks in it." Faye peeked out from behind a pile of firewood with a huge grin on her face. As I reached down to make a snowball, she burst into laughter and took off running. She darted across the little field that constituted the backyard, then slipped into the dark woods behind it. I rushed after her, but stopped short at the tree line. Babe," I called out. Are there wolves and bears up here?" Faye popped up out of the woods about 20 yards away. "There's a whole bunch of hiking trails," she replied, motioning for me to come over. I turned around and headed for the car. "Hike tomorrow, sweetie," I said over my shoulder. "Unpack today." "And look at the view from here," she said, framing the cabin with her fingers and peeping through it. I'm gonna draw the shit out of this place. I am agreeing to swear for this book, by the way. Full send. "Pencils are in the luggage, babe. Gotta take it in first." She huffed in defeat and followed me back. The inside of the cabin was white and modern, and it had obviously been remodeled over the years. It didn't quite match the rustic exterior, but at least it had a fireplace. There was a combined living room and kitchen, and a short hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. We dropped our bags on the floor and explored the place. Faye headed to the bedroom while I inspected the entertainment center. There was a new-ish flat-screen TV, a stereo unit from the early 90s, and a little DVD player. "Why didn't you tell me to bring movies?" I called down the hallway. "I didn't know they had a TV up here," Faye replied. "Hey, come feel this bed. It's like space foam or something." She groaned in relaxation. "What do you mean you didn't know?" I said, fumbling through the drawers in search of DVDs. "Haven't you been up here?" "Not since I was 14, and I was only here once. A lot has changed." "Only once? You visit your parents almost every Christmas. You guys never spent one up here?" "They haven't come up here in years. I think they "Oh my gosh," I blurted out, staring down at one of the cabinets of the entertainment center. "What?" Faye called. "Oh gosh," I said, reaching a hand inside. Faye stormed down the hall into the living room. "What's going on?" I pulled an object out of the cabinet. It's a Super Nintendo," I said, barely able to form the words. "Yeah, so?" I turned to face her directly. "A Super Nintendo, Faye." She rolled her eyes. "My dad was obsessed with it when I was little," she said dismissively and walked back toward the bedroom. "He bought it for Becca, but she never got into it. I guess he brought it up here to rot." "Oh gosh," I said, stopping her in her tracks. "What?" she snapped, cracking a smile. My lips trembled. It's Donkey Kong Country 2, I said. I held the game cartridge to my chest, embracing it as a childhood friend. "For goodness sake," Faye grumbled. "It's my all-time favorite game. It took me forever to beat. Best soundtrack ever." "Huh. Becca really liked the music too, actually," she said. "I'm marrying the wrong sister," I muttered. "Excuse me? I didn't quite catch that." "Leave us," I said, tossing the car keys at Faye. They bounced off her chest and fell to the floor. She remained motionless, unimpressed. "You can go home," I continued, sliding the cartridge into the Nintendo and taking a seat on the couch. We need some alone time." I heard the keys sail across the room and felt them smack into the back of my skull. The sun set, and a deep cold swept over the mountain. I rummaged through the food we'd bought, trying to figure out what to cook for dinner, and Faye relaxed on the couch with a few of the magazines she'd picked up at the airport. "Wow, Garden of the Gods looks neat," she said, holding up a picture for me to see. It was one of those must-see travel destination magazines for tourists. She wanted me to look at a spread of some weird rock formations, but my attention was drawn to a photo of a Native American headdress on the opposite page. This man's a gaming fanatic. Yes, he is, and I love it because I feel like these two characters are so realistic, and that's why I love this book so much. Okay. The Rocky Mountains were rich in Native American history and lore. Virtually every place you can visit here used to be home to an indigenous community, and there's some effort to preserve that fact in the local economy, for better or worse. It is possible to find authentic Indian wares in any of the 1,000 gift shops that dot the region, but finding portrayals of natives as anything other than fantastical heroes or mysterious savages is quite difficult. Pale Peak was no different. While buying groceries in town, the cashier eagerly regaled us with stories of magic and war. There's an industry here that sells a certain picture of the people who once inhabited these mountains. Mysterious Indians who performed rituals and fought with cowboys and vanished altogether, leaving behind only arrowheads and legends about constellations. But that enthusiasm for all things Native American, however commercial, really does make the land itself feel alive and humming with memory. I leafed through Faye's magazine after she passed out, scavenging for less sensational tidbits of the area's history. As the crackling of the fire died away, other noises came to my attention. The wind whispered across the mountain in short gusts, and new snow battered the windows. A few sounds rang through the forest, probably from animals, but I couldn't make them out. They were eerie and forlorn, like the howls of dying wolves. The longer I listened, the more my skin crawled, so I took out my laptop and tested the cabin's ancient Wi-Fi. The connection was weak and repeatedly dropped while I browsed the internet. I gave up after a half hour and went to bed, leaving Faye on the couch. Waking her up from a dead slumber didn't always end well. Sometime around midnight, I woke to the sound of Faye's voice. "Felix, babe, get up. Get up, someone's outside." She stood in the doorway with a blanket wrapped around her. She'd been on the couch the whole time. "What?" I said, rubbing my eyes into focus. It was dark. The only light in the room came from the moon. It poured in from the window and bathed Faye in cold silver. Her ghostly appearance and the fear in her voice frightened me. "I heard someone outside," she continued. "Someone calling for help." I kicked the sheets off and shuffled to the living room in my boxers. It was even darker here. All the curtains were drawn. "I don't hear—" "Shh," she said, grabbing my arm and holding me still. Eventually, I did hear a sound. It was the pained cry of an animal, or maybe a person. It sounded more sorrowful than injured. Faye and I exchanged concerned glances. "Peek out the door," she whispered, handing her blanket to me. I rummaged through the bags on the kitchen counter and found the flashlight that Faye's dad had given us. The cry resounded again, this time louder, and it seemed to say, "Leave me alone," or "I'm alone." It was so distorted by the wind and echo that it barely sounded human. The moment I cracked the door open, a blast of frigid mountain air stung my face. It burned the last bit of sleep from my eyes and sharpened all my senses. The light's beam moved across the deck and out into the clearing. It lit up a fluffy wonderland of snow, but revealed nothing unusual. I swept the light back and forth across the tree line, but its glow was too weak to penetrate the blackness. "Nothing," I said, withdrawing to the warmth of the cabin. "Probably an elk or something. Those things make some freaking weird noises. Probably even more so when they're hurt." Dissatisfied, Faye walked around the room, peering out each window. "That was a person, Felix. You know it was a person. Maybe a camper got lost." "Camping in this snow?" I asked, incredulous. As a Californian, it seemed utterly absurd. You know, there's this thing called pareidolia. See, our brains come up with this kind of software application that's pre-installed when we're born. Facial recognition, pattern recognition, that sort of thing. It helps us recognize our mothers when we're babies and helps us— "Uh-huh," Faye interrupted. "Well, sometimes it misfires," I continued. "You know when you're a kid and you see a shadow on your wall at night and it looks like a monster? Or when you see animals in the clouds? That's pareidolia. And it happens with a sound too. The wind blows through a cave or something just right. People think they hear a voice. Your brain even makes words out of it, in the language you know best." Faye shook her wild hair out of her face and exhaled sharply. Pareidolia, my ass. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes. She tossed and turned for hours. Morning came, and with it a symphony of bird calls. My joy at the brilliant sunny day was tempered once I looked in the driveway. Our rental car was now encased in a brick of ice, waiting to be chipped free by future archaeologists. Restful sleep had only taken Faye around 3 a.m., so she remained dead to the world long after I ate breakfast. I put a good hour into Donkey Kong, then suited up in my winter gear to go poke around the property. Outside, I found no trace of last night's visitor. No footprints pocked the white landscape. It must have snowed earlier this morning. But now the sky was clear and blue, and the sun perched high overhead. It illuminated the woods and made them bright and inviting, so I dashed across the short clearing and took a stroll inside. The snow now concealed the path that Faye had mentioned yesterday, so I made my own. I promenaded between the trees, watching the frosty sunbeams that appeared and vanished before me as I moved. I lamented, leaving my cell phone and its excellent camera back at the cabin. Faye and I had developed a special fondness for the outdoors. We regularly hiked in the redwoods during our time in Santa Cruz and eventually proposed to her while we were camping. "Felix," a voice echoed from far away. Little birds and squirrels jumped around in the trees in agitation, knocking bits of snow off the branches. I doubled back to the meadow and saw Faye's face through the little bedroom window. "Morning," I called. "Wait right there. I'm getting dressed," she yelled. Her voice boomed across the mountain and returned shortly after. We spent the late morning creating a mental map of the forest behind the cabin. We often did this before embarking upon a serious hike to ensure we don't get lost. Oh, I accidentally flipped the page. I was so confused for a second. The path we forged through the half-foot of snow took us to the western edge of Pale Peak, where we could see down into the gorge and over the next mountain. A river rushed below, snaking between the rocks. The splendor of nature beamed from every direction, beckoning us further into the woods. On our way back, Faye thought she heard a voice. She mentioned it a few times as we walked, shushing me and spinning around, trying to locate the source of the noise. I strained to hear anything above the whistling of the wind through the trees and the fading gush of water. "I think you're shaken up a bit from last night, sweetie," I offered. The look she shot at me almost forced the words right back into my mouth. "When have you ever known me to be paranoid?" she pressed. "I'm not some basket case, Felix. I heard someone." "What did it sound like?" I asked. We waded through the shallow snow, carefully following our own tracks back to the cabin. "It was a man," she said. He was upset. "He must have tried your mom's casserole," I replied. It was a big risk, but it paid off. Faye burst into laughter, her voice reverberating through the woods. I loved so much the way her eyes squinted when she laughed. We talked about food the whole way back, working up an appetite as we did. As we neared the edge of the wood, I stopped to take a leak. Faye wandered up ahead. "Felix." Her voice came out flat and dead. As soon as the word hit my brain, I immediately felt a hot rush of panic. Something was wrong. She sounded afraid. "It's a bear," I thought, imagining Faye standing face to face with a grizzly. "What happened?" Not much. Felix and Faye are just exploring the backwoods. It's daytime, so." "What?" I whispered, zipping my fly and sneaking toward the sound of her voice. My heartbeat rattled in my ribcage. "Look," she said. Faye stood a dozen yards ahead of me between two trees. Her hand was extended in front of her, pointing at something I couldn't see. "What is it?" I whispered, still moving like a soldier behind enemy lines. I rounded a few trees and tried to make out what she was pointing at. Something odd came into view. A dangling, twirling thing. I moved closer, pushing a few needled branches out of my way as I did. There was an ornament in the tree, just above Faye's head. "What the hell is that?" I said, almost laughing. Relief washed over me, alleviating the sudden terror that we'd bumped into a grizzly. The thing was made of twigs and bones, expertly bent into strained and taut shapes. Pieces of ragged twine swung from it, some of them tied to hawk feathers. More string was woven through its center in the shape of a mangled spiderweb. It took a moment for me to figure out what I was looking at, but eventually I recognized the object. Is that a dream catcher? I asked, more to myself than Faye. She remained silent. The structure was huge. Unlike the fragile little ones I'd seen in bedroom windows or on rear-view mirrors, this dream catcher was over 2 feet in diameter. Its construction looked frantic. The gnarled branches and twine held each other together in an unnatural, almost menacing way. Some of the feathers and bones had dried blood on them. I imagined a madman hurriedly assembling the thing, attempting to ward off the voices in his head. "Who the hell put this here?" Faye said, causing me to jump. I was so bewitched by the object I'd nearly forgotten she was there. "I don't know," I replied, reaching up to touch it. "Don't!" she yelled, slapping the back of my head. "Aren't you the one who loves horror movies? You're gonna get cursed or something, stupid." "I wonder how long it's been here," I said. "Someone was just here," Faye replied. "Look." She pointed to a set of footprints in the snow. They wrapped right around the tree that the dream catcher was now dangled from. I made a print with my own boot next to one of them. They were roughly the same size, but little detail could be seen in either of them. "They might be mine," I said earlier when you were asleep. "And you didn't notice this giant thing next to your head?" "I don't know. I mean, it's possible I just walked right past it. I really don't know." "Leave it alone and let's get inside," Faye said, fear on the edge of her voice. "If you take it down, whoever put it here will know. That's probably what they want, to mess with us." She brushed past me and walked into the meadow. Any relief I'd felt before now washed away in a torrent of dread. I suddenly believed Faye. I believed that someone was wandering around out here last night, someone who had no business being out here in the freezing dark. I glanced around the side of the tree to see Faye approaching our cabin in the distance. Whoever put this thing here had a clear view of the building. We'd never be able to see them back due to the shadow cover beneath the trees. Unnerved, I took one last look at the object and trudged off after Faye. Okay, a little bit more and then we'll probably end. That evening, Faye and I tried our best to ignore the strange ornament hanging a few 100 feet from the cabin. We agreed that it was probably old, and if someone had indeed put it up recently, it was probably just to scare us. Even so, Faye spent nearly 20 minutes trying to get enough signal from her phone to call the ranger station at the foot of this mountain. When she finally did, a trooper named William Pike promised to swing by in the morning. He assured Faye that there was a popular hiking trail on the north side of Pale Peak, and that city teenagers would sometimes come up and torment visitors staying in the cabins. That calmed our nerves a bit. We had a candlelit dinner to the tune of relaxing world music thanks to Faye's laptop. Then we broke out one of the several board games she insisted on bringing from our parents' house. A little smile crept across her face when she pulled out Scrabble. When we first met, while hanging out at a big gathering with our mutual friends, she had won the game by laying down the letters for denied across my word date. Between songs, something bashed into the kitchen window. Faye rushed to silence her laptop as I went to inspect the glass. It was unbroken, and the impact sounded muffled, so I assumed the noise was caused by a wayward owl. Flashlight in hand, I headed outside to look for a dead bird in the snow, but found nothing. While closing the door, a faint voice called out from the woods. More snow was beginning to fall, and the wind intermittently kicked up, so I couldn't be sure of what I heard, but it sounded like, "Why'd you go?" or "Where'd you go?" I stood there for a long time, listening carefully, but heard only the eerie howls of the wind. As it rushed and seeped through the million branches, it occasionally formed the sounds of a human voice. I shuddered and dismissed the idea that someone was out there. We turned in early. I struggled to fall asleep, but eventually did, only to be shaken awake not 10 minutes later by an agitated Faye. "Felix," she whispered, rattling my arm. "Get up, someone's outside again." My eyes shot open at her words. Without responding, I leapt out of bed and grabbed my pants. Faye sat up, holding the sheets defensively to her chest. What a combination, yes, date and denied. That's so funny. I love that. Their relationship is very cute. He's walking around right out there. She pointed toward the front of the house. I held still, trying to listen for a moment, but I heard nothing. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? I asked loudly, prompting her to shush me. I held still. The crunching of the snow broke our silence. Something was tromping around the outside of the cabin, a few yards out. It circled the house, pausing briefly at the back door that led to our bedroom. The footsteps then continued back around toward the living room. Son of a bitch is casing the house, I whispered back, trying to figure out how to get in. I stormed out of the room and grabbed the flashlight. I threw open the front door and blasted the darkness with the light's brightest setting, only to find a thick blanket of snow gleaming up at me. Snowflakes washed through the air in tidal waves, obscuring my vision and giving cover to anyone who might be sneaking around out there. The footsteps I'd heard a moment ago vanished into the wind, and after a while, even the breeze receded into the night. Not satisfied, I closed the door and scrambled around the cabin, pointing the light through each window. There was no sign of footprints or their maker anywhere. When I returned to the bedroom to check the back door, Faye was gazing out the window, motionless. This couple's amazing. They are. I love them. Faye is a whole mood. I relate to her very much. You see something? I asked. I looked everywhere. I couldn't find anything. She gave no indication that she'd even heard me. Faye? Someone was out there, she said, turning toward me. Her voice was determined and sharp. Could have been a bear, I offered. I didn't really believe that, but the look on her face demanded reassurance. They come up to houses and cars all the time when they smell food. I mean, come on. Nobody's out there playing practical jokes on a night like this. What is it with you lately? She said. Her face sent me back on my heels. You don't believe anything I say. You're telling me it was an animal? Do you have ears? It was walking on 2 fucking legs, Felix. Some freak is coming into this cabin at night. I sank down to the bed and looked up into Faye's eyes. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said. I'm not trying to make you feel crazy. I'm just not ready to accept that we're being stalked on a mountain 6 miles away from the nearest town. The ranger will be here in the morning, okay? Then we'll get some answers. Faye slipped into bed and turned her back to me. I touched her shoulder softly, but she shook me off. Someone was trying to look inside, she said with finality. It took a long time to fall back asleep. Faye was restless and mumbled indecipherable things for hours. I lay there in the dark, trying to make sense of her incoherent ramblings and imagining the things she must have been dreaming. My thoughts became more abstract with the passage of time, and eventually they blended into dreams of my own. I don't know how long I slept. A cacophony of shrieks and sobs dragged me from my slumber. I fumbled for the light amidst Faye's deafening cries, wondering if someone had tried to get in through the door of our bedroom. When my hand found the light, its brightness silenced her. She covered her eyes, shaking all over. I immediately recognized that state. She'd had a nightmare. I grabbed onto her and squeezed tight, which was my standard remedy, and it usually worked. It's okay, baby, it's okay. She sobbed into my chest, but eventually her breathing slowed. What was it? I asked. Do you want to talk about it? It took Faye a moment to get her bearings. She gazed around the room in confusion, shielding her eyes and pointing at the light. I turned it off. Faye has an undiagnosed sleep disorder. She regularly talks in her sleep, usually funny things like sassing her coworkers, and sometimes sleepwalks. She even suffers from sporadic bouts of night terrors, which are a bit like nightmares, except the monsters and killers don't disappear when she opens her eyes. Instead, they spill into the room and remain very real for several moments, causing her to freak out while she's awake. All of her sleep disturbances are triggered by stress. Things like job changes or money problems will send her into week-long episodes of terror. Faye pulled herself away from me and leaned against the headboard. She wiped tears from her eyes. I was in the woods, she said, pointing a shaking finger at the window. I caressed her other hand and nodded my attention. I was naked, just standing there, watching. Someone was up ahead past the trees. He was digging in the snow, really frantic, digging down into the ground beneath, and he looked up and saw me watching him. Then I was running, trying to find my way back, and he was following me. But he didn't feel like a person. He felt empty, like he didn't have a soul. Gosh, I said, squeezing her hand. But you're okay. You're right here. You never left. It was just a dream. Faye squeezed my hand back. I think he wanted to eat me, she said. She fiddled nervously with a tangle in her hair. I could feel this terrible hunger that he had, like he was hungry for 1,000 years. My stomach churned. Thoughts of the eerie dream catcher invaded my mind. I'm stopping there. We are going to stop there for now. Let me move back over. Just doing. And this. Alright. Well, we are ending there for now. I hope you are enjoying the book so far. I'm having fun reading it. I think I'm doing decently for the most part. I'm trying to speak as clearly as I can and not stumble too much, but no, not a cliffhanger. Yeah, it's okay. We'll be back on Monday with it. So, the book is better than I thought it would be. I love this book so much. It's so good. So yeah, we'll continue this for my Monday stream, and like I said earlier, I'm not streaming tomorrow because I have an overnight conference, but I will be streaming on Sunday. I'll be back around 1 p.m. ish. I might have to push it a little bit with some more Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. So we're gonna see if there are any friends that we can raid today. But in the meantime, for those of you watching on YouTube, if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it's completely free, so you can always unsubscribe later. 2 people. We got Lizzie and we got AJ, and one is doing Overwatch 2 and the other is doing Later Alligator. I'm kind of tempted to send you to AJ today because AJ has less internet issues, so it won't cut out as much. So I'm gonna prepare that raid, but I will see you guys on Sunday for Doki Doki. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next stream. Bye guys.